Exactly. The pressure to operate like a business, to generate revenue, can sometimes clash with the fundamental goals of education, like fostering critical thinking or ensuring equitable access. It's a balancing act that, the paper suggests, institutions don't always get right.
And that can lead straight to inequalities in the system, a really tough balancing act. Okay, moving on, the paper makes a distinction between intention and purpose in education. What's the core idea there?
It emphasizes how crucial intentions are at the start. When we design curricula, when we build universities, the initial aims are deeply rooted in our societal values, our culture.
What we hope education will achieve.
Precisely. But the paper then points out how fragile those intentions can be. There's often a drift, a deviation between the original idea and the final outcome, what you, the learner, actually experience or take away.
So, good intentions don't always guarantee good results.
Not at all. Things get lost in translation or misinterpreted or maybe co-opted by other forces. The paper even introduces this uncomfortable concept of semi-truths and semi-lies emerging in this gap.
Semi-truths. That sounds problematic.
It is. It suggests knowledge that isn't outright false, but isn't fully accurate or complete either, perhaps because the original intention got distorted. And explaining why these deviations happen is incredibly difficult, even for ourselves. Why did I intend to learn X, but somehow ended up understanding Y?
It's messy. And the paper also touches on risk, right? How different people approach risk within the educational setting.
Yeah, not everyone has the same appetite for uncertainty. Some students, some professors might prefer sticking to established facts, clear paths. Others are more willing to venture into ambiguous territory, explore unconventional ideas.
And these different attitudes affect the whole dynamic.
Absolutely. They influence what gets researched, what gets taught, how classrooms feel. And ultimately, the paper stresses how hard it is to judge someone's actions or choices in education without understanding their internal thought process, their original intentions, and the specific situation they were in.
You can't just look at the outcome. You need the context.
Exactly. Context is key. Now, the final major section we looked at deals with the drivers of educational trends. What's Redzepi's perspective here? Does he look to the past?
Well, interestingly, he kind of pushes back against relying too heavily on the past. He argues that just looking backwards gives us limited insight into why things are changing now. History shows us what happened, but not necessarily the complex causal factors driving current trends.
So instead of just history lessons.
Instead, he proposes thinking about geographically and culturally diverse knowledge platforms, different centers of learning around the world complementing each other, creating a sort of global knowledge ecosystem.
Moving beyond simplistic divisions.
Right. He specifically questions those easy labels like East versus West in understanding global knowledge flows. He thinks they're too broad, too simplistic.
So what should we focus on then?
He suggests shifting the focus to how these different knowledge platforms are managed and applied, and crucially, how they actually benefit the average person, the learner. It's about the practical utility and accessibility.
Making it relevant. And the paper loops back to technology here too, doesn't it? That constant race.
Yes, the relentless push for new educational technologies. It fuels that ongoing debate. Do we need radical reforms, or was there some kind of golden age of traditional education we should try and recapture?
And he mentions the conservative critique.
He does. The argument that liberalization and commercialization have led to things like weak degrees, especially compared to a perhaps romanticized view of older systems focused on deep specialization.
That idea that maybe breadth has come at the expense of depth.
Potentially. But then he brings in another angle, the perspective of non-Western knowledge platforms.
How are they navigating this?
He suggests they're often trying to integrate new technologies while simultaneously making a conscious effort to preserve their own cultural values and traditions. It's not just about adopting Western models wholesale.
A hybrid approach, maybe?
Could be. However, the paper also raises a serious concern here about the potential marginalization of indigenous knowledge within this globalized, tech-driven landscape.
And the risk of widening inequality gaps.
Exactly. The worry is that even as technology spreads, power imbalances might mean that certain knowledge systems get subordinated, making existing disparities worse. And connected to this tech acceleration is a really crucial point about us, about humanity.
What's that?
The idea that human society, our understanding, our regulations, our social structures, we're lagging behind the pace of technological change.
We build the tools faster than we can figure out how to use them wisely or understand their full impact.
Precisely. And this creates huge uncertainty, especially for education. How do you prepare students for jobs that don't even exist yet, using technologies we barely understand? It's a massive challenge for learners trying to figure out what skills are actually valuable long term.
Yeah, that uncertainty is palpable. And the paper briefly touches on who's driving all this innovation, right? Governments versus corporations.
It suggests differing motives. Governments often focused on maintaining stability, perhaps preserving power structures. Multinational corporations, driven primarily by profit. These different interests can push innovation in conflicting directions.
Sometimes aligning, sometimes clashing, affecting the whole educational trajectory.
And finally, it circles back to that fundamental debate in curriculum design. Specialization versus a broader, multidisciplinary approach.
The age-old question: deep knowledge in one field or a wider perspective across many? The paper doesn't necessarily resolve it, but highlights it as a persistent tension in how we structure learning.
It seems like a debate that's likely to continue indefinitely. So, just to kind of pull it all together from our deep dive into Redzeppi's paper, we've journeyed through the core dilemmas learners face when the system shows its cracks.
We've contrasted the high ideals of education with its sometimes messy, commercialized, and unequal reality.
We explored the idea that knowledge itself isn't permanent, it's temporary, shaped by memory, suppression, and external forces.
We looked at the importance of intention versus actual purpose, and how easily things can deviate.
And we considered the complex web of factors: technology, politics, economics, culture, driving the trends we see in education globally.
And reflecting on all these points, maybe think about your own educational path. Do any of these dilemmas, these tensions between the ideal and the real, resonate with your experiences?
That's really the takeaway question for you, the listener. And maybe one final thought to chew on, building on that uncertainty about future needs. Given that education systems are always in flux, always imperfect, what's your responsibility as a learner in actively shaping your own understanding and navigating this endless learning journey? Something to ponder long after we sign off.